How come? There was like on, said on the dot, I'll come in and we'll go live like that. So that's what we did.
Great.
So hi, Dorina.
Hi, Vikram. How are you?
Very good. I like this thing on your head.
Oh, thanks.
What is that?
This is my one of my traditional outfits. So a lot of you'll see a lot of people from my community wear it, especially when there is an occasion and there's a celebration or an event of some sort. So we usually adorn it, and we actually put it together with this one.
Wow.
Which goes to the neck, but I'm not putting it on today.
Why? It looks nice. Come on, Dorina. It looks so nice.
Not. I just find it too heavy for today. And it's freezing.
But the earrings.
It's cold.
Is that cold?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. Also the earrings as well. So there are beads which women sort of make. And you'll realize that in a lot of the indigenous peoples, they have different sorts of beads, and they all mean different things. There are some which are worn by, unmarried women to show that you're unmarried, and then there are those that are worn by married women or engaged or the elderly. So each of them has a sort of a different meaning. But this one is very popular, particularly among young women. Either married or unmarried, you just don't it. It's just part of beauty, really.
Actually, what I should have done is I should have told everyone who's participating in the symposium to send me something from their country, from their culture, and I should have also worn that. I should have also worn that. It would have been nice.
Yeah, next time if you're able to come to Nairobi, I'll be sure to get you some. Now, of course, the men also have different.
But why are you saying? No, but how are you saying, Dorina, I'm not in Nairobi right now? Am I not in Nairobi? Are you not talking to me while you're in Nairobi?
I am assuming you're in New Delhi.
Wow, I'm in Nairobi because you are sitting. You are sitting in Nairobi, and you are talking to me while you're in Nairobi. So why am I not in Nairobi? Am I not in your room right now? I'm in the room that you are in.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes perfect sense.
But how cold is it?
I don't know the temperature, but it's very cold. This weather, it keeps changing. So today it's very chilly. So there's no sun. There's no sun today.
20 degrees is not bad.
20, well, yeah, but for some of us who are used to 30 degrees, 35, it's quite chilly.
But I always thought that Nairobi always has about 25 degrees temperature throughout the year.
Yes, it does. But you see, most of us also work in 40 degrees environments. So, and that's most of our times. But yeah, Nairobi tends to be around 26, 27 degrees. But now it's actually cold and there's no sun. And yeah, we are not used to it. I mean, July and August is always very cold, but it's sort of, by now it should be a little bit warmer, but today it's not. It's quite cold.
Because I have a friend from Kenya. He's the High Commissioner in Delhi from Kenya. So he keeps telling me this is an ideal weather for golf, Nairobi. Throughout the year, perfect.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it can't be better. It can't get better than that. Come off it. 25.
It will be. It is good. We can't complain. Just somehow today is freezing cold for me.
So Dorina, please tell us about the symposium. What is the symposium all about?
Yes, thank you, Vikram. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this symposium. I think it's a very good conversation that we are having about Indigenous peoples and mediation, because a lot of the times it's you hear just a lot of conversations about conflict resolution or dispute resolution, but it's not really been centered around Indigenous practices or Indigenous peoples' voices being heard in terms of some of this, what works and what doesn't work in terms of mediation. So I think you being able to pull in people from virtually all over the world to come and have conversations about Indigenous peoples and mediation is really, I think this is the right time. And I know it's also building on from the last year's symposium, which was around, was it culture?
Mediation in our culture and traditions.
Yeah, and traditions. Yeah. So I think it's really good that we get to focus a little bit more on Indigenous peoples. And there are, of course, different things that you can learn from different parts of the world. So so far I have listened to, the discussions from Peru. I also heard a bit about Canada. Also, you had somebody from Kenya yesterday. So a lot of these are also like learning opportunities for us to learn what is working and what is, what are things that you can take on from different parts of the world that we can learn and appreciate in terms of the Indigenous people's contribution to the work of mediation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been very nice. I mean, of course, like Luis Ore from Peru, he's been on my shows in various shows and he's spoken about what work he's doing. And I always tell him that what work you're doing is something that has to happen throughout the world. I mean, communities affected by mining projects is his core competency. And I think all over the world, there are issues there. And indigenous communities specifically have been affected by all that. So to bring them all together. So that's one. What yesterday, what Alicia spoke about her experience in Canada, I thought it was really, I mean, really something which really we need to learn from, because obviously there are some practices which will get lost because this modern concept of mediation will be pushed everywhere, and people will think that is the way to go, but for me that's not the way to go. There is so much that we have to learn. So I think it's been really nice, and of course thank you very much for being part of it. And from here onwards, Dorina, it is your show. I am on mute. I'm not on mute. I keep saying I'm there, but I'm not there. Please tell us about yourself as much as you want to, and then from there, yeah, please.
Thank you so much. If you allow me, I will share some slides also to sort of just guide my session today.
Please, please.
Yes. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah. Perfect.
Yes. So let me start about myself, who I am. So my name is Dorina Prech. I come from West Pokot County, which is one of the 47 devolved units of Kenya. I'll show you a map in a minute. And I identify as an Indigenous person, born to a Pokot mother and a Sengwer father. Although I have sort of become more assimilated into the Pokot because my father moved from where he was and sort of settled in the Pokot land. So I identify both as a pastoralist, which is mainly people who had livestock and move from place to place in search of water and pasture, as well as a Sengwer, which is a group of hunter-gatherers, people who still rely very much on the forest for their nourishment, for their food, and for their survival. I am a peace builder. I have been in this peace building space for quite some time. And also, as I have now gone to school and graduated university, I have focused my life on advocating for the rights of Indigenous peoples. I currently live and work in Nairobi, although most of my work is really focused on sort of the Indigenous people's territories, which I'll talk about in a minute. But at the moment, I work and live in Nairobi solely on advocating for Indigenous people's rights. So this is West Pokot County, which the one you see on the brown or red there. It's sort of on the west of Kenya, so bordering Uganda. So this is Uganda on this side. And yeah, so there's some other counties on this side, and also towards the north, this is where you'll find Turkana County. So this particular county is inhabited by the Pokot, who are, so the name of the county is named after the people, the majority of the people living there, who are the Pokot, but also they are the minority Sengwer people, as well as other tribes of Kenya, who, because the Constitution of Kenya allows you to, work and live anywhere in the territory of Kenya. So there are also other tribes who are doing businesses and other things, the Kikuyus, the Luyas, you'll find all of them there. So the main activity for West Pokot is livestock keeping, particularly in the dry lands. So a lot of livestock is kept there. A lot of goats, supplied to Nairobi, as well as, crop agriculture. There's also a lot of other issues, other economic activities like mining. There's a lot of exploration of minerals in that particular territory. Also, on the border with Turkana, we also have one of the electricity generating gorges in the country, and we also have quite a bit of wildlife reserves and game reserves in West Pokot. So that is basically where I come from. So now I want to shift a bit about really and explaining or why we identify as indigenous peoples, because that terminology oftentimes it's problematic. And I also want to say at this point that Kenya has not ratified specific legislation on indigenous peoples. However, there are groups of people who identify themselves as indigenous. So when you look at the United Nations definition in the 80s, that was is like a working definition of indigenous peoples. I'm not going to read the whole of it, but the idea of a group of people who consider themselves as distinct from other sectors of society. So basically in terms of how they look or how they do their own things, feeling like they are distinct. Or also the idea of that, are determined to preserve, develop, and transmit future generations their ancestral territories and their ethnic identity. So you'll find that the people who identify as indigenous people in Kenya are really distinct in terms of them, how they have continued to preserve their culture, how they are very grounded in terms of their traditions and ways of doing things, despite the influence of aspects such as colonialism, which I know you're also going to talk about, colonialism and mediation. A lot of these people have sort of remained intact, and they have not been influenced a lot by the Western influence. So those are some of the people who consider themselves as indigenous. For me, I find it sometimes very uncomfortable when people say indigenous versus modern. I find that really problematic, because that is to say that indigenous is less than, but that's not what we stand for here. We are saying that we are distinct, we appreciate, we are proud of where we've come from, and who we identify as a society, and we will use whatever means possible to ensure that we continue with our identity. Our children and the generations that will come will learn from us, and they'll want to perpetuate that identity as indigenous people. So in Kenya, there are mainly sort of three groups which identify as indigenous peoples. Mainly the pastoralists, who I have mentioned, the people who had livestock, and they rely heavily on livestock for their economic but also cultural identity. The hunter-gatherers, these are people who still rely on honey, the sort of what is found in the forest, the fruits, and they actually been found to be sort of like the best custodians of our natural resources, just forest. We also have some fisher people, so fisher folks who basically move from place to place, particularly around the lakes, and they rely a lot, almost solely on the lake for their survival. So like feeding on fish. And also there are other small farming communities who have continued from pre-colonial times to do small farming activities. So if you look at this map where I have green, this is where a lot of the pastoralists and the sort of the indigenous people are found in Kenya. So they are quite dispersed across the country. You'll note that, for example, towards the southwest near Tanzania here, this is where you'll find the Maasais. They're also on the Tanzania side. And then when you come to the north, where the West Pokot and Turkana is, you'll find also Turkanas and Pokots towards the Ugandan side. And you'll also find even South Sudan, perhaps you'll find some Turkanas there, as well as Ethiopia. So basically that is to tell you that they are dispersed across the region, and they don't necessarily respect the colonialist boundaries, right? Because before Kenya was put on a map, these people used to, move. They were borderless, right? They used to move from border, from territory to territory, and they had relations across these borders. And then, so the pastoralist community are somehow quite a sizable number of people, about 25% of the total national population, although they also occupy one of the biggest areas in terms of coverage. And then the hunter-gatherers are very few. There are some which are as few as 3,000, depending on where they are. So these are some of the areas of hunter-gatherers, for example. So the Yaku people, for example, are found towards Laikipia, where they live in a forest, and they have also been fighting for a long time to sort of have ownership, custody of their forest. And also what you know about the Yaku is that they are I think there are now only 3 people who speak the language fluently, because they have been sort of influenced by the majority of the tribes that are around there, particularly the Maasai. So they have sort of been absorbed. And they're really fighting right now to make sure they preserve their language by making sure that it's translated, it's written in a book, and they are developing their biocultural protocols and whatnot to preserve their culture. And then the Ogiek, I think these ones are also very much known, where they have also been involved in big legal battle with the state with regards to them being left to occupy one of the forests in Kenya, and they have actually won a case against the state, where they are told that they are the legal custodians of the forest. The Sengwer as well, also they are also involved in legal cases with the government with regards to them owning a certain part of forest in Kenya. And then the El Molo are a very few group of people who are fisher folk. They are found in Lake Turkana. And, the story is that they moved from Ethiopia and they decided to settle there because, the land was very dry and they could not do agriculture. So they shifted to fish, relying on fish. And they are known to be very excellent fishermen. They know how to fish. And they rely almost entirely on fish for their survival. Of course, they get some maybe support from, aid and all of that, but really their survival is around fish. And then in terms of the pastoralists, of course, the Maasai are the sort of the brand that represents Kenya in terms of, the culture. We also have the Samburu, who are also related to the Maasai. We have the Somali, who are also, across Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia. We have the Pokot, who I have mentioned, Borana, among others. So many others who identify as pastoralists apart from these people. So just your context in terms of where these people are located before we go deeper into mediation and conflict resolution. These people are contrary to a lot of opinion about, the sort of the negative side or the bad stories that you hear about the indigenous peoples. These people occupy a territory that has so much potential. So, for example, they occupy the biggest chunk of land in Kenya. They are the tourism and livestock hub. So, 70% of Kenya's wildlife is in their territory, and also the livestock is, particularly the beef, is basically from their territory. The region is also abundant in natural wealth, oil and gas. There's a lot of exploration of oil, like in Turkana. Sand, for construction, precious minerals, medicinal herbs. You'll see a lot of foreigners, come in and out of these regions because they know that there are specific plants that are of medicinal value and they're really contributing to, issues of research and all of that. And also the fact that the drylands have now been found, when it comes to issues of fighting climate change, have been found to be able to absorb carbon in the air, and they, do this carbon sequestration. And so there's an opportunity for the indigenous peoples to benefit from the carbon credits and all these other initiatives that are there in terms of addressing climate change. But also even more than that, in terms of their contribution to other people learning about adapting to climate change, there's a lot that can be learned from indigenous people in terms of how they manage variability, because they live in a territory that is very harsh, that depends a lot on managing the changes that come and being really adaptable in a very short amount of time. And then also the other final thing is that they have very strong social networks, which are very key to social cohesion. So basically, research shows that indigenous peoples actually contribute to sort of the low levels of crime and conflicts in the region, because they have this ability to maintain social networks and relationships, right? On the flip side, there is still a lot to be done for indigenous peoples in Kenya. There's a lot of land and natural resource tenure insecurity. So a lot of the land now is sort of communally owned, and there's a legislation in place to ensure that they actually register and manage their land. However, there has been a lot of challenges. It was passed in 2016, but to date, no single community has been able to register their lands because of so many reasons. So basically, there is still very insecurity in terms of them being able to lose their land. And there are other laws that are coming in place to ensure that, for example, governments can dispossess them of their land without, compensation in good time. Or even the value of that land is not as any other land in Kenya. So there are all these challenges around land and resource tenure insecurity when it comes to even the exploration of the minerals and the oil and everything. When it comes to revenue, they don't have an upper hand in terms of really negotiating for themselves. And then also, of course, poor service delivery. We talk a lot about marginalization in terms of literacy levels. They have the poorest. It gets worse when it comes to, for example, female literacy levels. When it comes to access to health, the area is wide, vast, and government services, social services are basically nearly non-existent. Although I must say that now things are improving when we started having this devolution and devolved system of governance, because then resources have somewhat been able to trickle down to some of these regions, right? Poor political representation, of course, because mainly of illiteracy and that systemic years of marginalization. So there are not very many people from the territories of the indigenous people who are involved, who are engaged in politics compared to other parts of the country. And then, of course, discrimination and exclusion. Particularly, if you look at the Somali, for example, there are issues of discrimination when it comes to issuance of identity cards, because they have to go through this rigorous vetting process to confirm or to justify or to say that they are indeed Kenyans. So there are all this discrimination and exclusion and feelings of otherness when it comes to indigenous peoples. And then also when it comes to just general service provision, they are quite excluded and they are not able to enjoy the same rights as Kenyans. So that is really the context that we are dealing with in terms of the indigenous peoples in Kenya. So now I want to shift a little bit and talk about, mediation and conflict resolution. I'm not going to go really far and wide. What I'll do is I will give a story of sort of a conflict resolution mechanism that we could call mediation, but it may not check the box in terms of the Western style definition of mediation, right? Because if you look at the...
But before that, Dorina, why would you not go far and wide? We have enough time. Take your time. No issue at all of time. Please take yourself to as much time as you want.
What I'll do is we can get into a session where you can ask questions and we can delve deeper. But for now, I want us to just talk about this, what I'll call a contribution of indigenous peoples in terms of mediation. I'll not talk a lot more, but I know it will come as we continue. So if there are other things that I miss out, you can just ask me, and then we can engage in conversation. So I'm saying that it is not the traditional or typical way of mediation, because I have listened to the conversations that have been happening for the past few days, and these are people who've basically been trained by the book, about mediation, the process of mediation, what to do when you're in that mediation setting or preparation for it, it's very much sort of like by the book, and it's almost like you have to follow these guidelines for it to be called mediation. However, for the indigenous peoples and these territories that I'm talking about, we don't necessarily have a word to define that because we are working in a very fluid environment. And also because we are working in a cultural setting that a lot of the things that come in place when it comes to, for example, having somebody from outside come and mediate conflicts may not really be possible. So if you look at mediation, how we define it, or Western style type of mediation is basically somebody else from outside coming to help people resolve a conflict by facilitating the process, but not necessarily like giving solutions, right? Giving sort of like solutions to the problem at hand. So they have become like sort of the go-between in terms of helping people find a solution, but not necessarily giving ideas and solutions. So
I have no problem with the person giving ideas and suggestions and all that. I have no problem with that. With mediation, not a problem. It's just that the person is not deciding for you, doesn't have the authority to impose a solution. So that's
exactly.
The only, yeah.
Exactly. Yes. So yeah, you're right. So the idea, actually what I meant was that idea of imposing. But in some instances, we've had, in the traditional setting, somebody who is a mediator, but they can also, impose. But I don't know, maybe we would not call that a mediation process. So anyway, let me come to now this particular case. So the indigenous people, there are certain aspects that are very key, even when it comes to conflict resolution. And one of it is culture. And basically cultural norms, how things are done and how people identify are passed down generation to generation, right? And of course, you heard about, oral stories, how, through songs and dance and narratives, a lot of these stories get passed down from generation to generation. So when it comes to dispute resolution, the beginning point for pastoralists is survival. So conflict, there's a saying, for example, among the Pokot, which is that, sometimes even the tongue can suffer the wrath of the teeth. So basically, which is to say that conflict is inevitable for people who are always living together, right? And that is passed down either through narratives or stories that as long as you're in society, at the end of the day, conflict will always exist. And so the best thing to do is to find ways or creative strategies to resolve those disputes, right? And then also the territory I have described to you as dry and predictable when it comes to weather and insecurity and other issues, you have no choice of surviving on your own. So the best strategy is to make sure that you are living in harmony with the people next to you. And this is actually contrary to the narrative that we hear a lot when it comes to the indigenous peoples, for example, in the drylands of the Horn of Africa, that people think that people are competing for natural resources, for water and pasture, fighting. It is not true, because these people understand that the only way we are going to survive is by cooperating, because today we will have drought on our side and they'll have plenty. So there is no way we cannot cooperate with them, right? And so there's this proactiveness in terms of making sure that when you're dealing with conflict, you're always making sure that you're building relationships and sustaining relationships with the other, okay? The other may be the other community, the other tribe, who maybe you'll be engaged in war from time to time. So the indigenous people's social system places a lot of premium on communal patterns of decision-making and ownership. So, and it's driven a lot by customary institutions. So the Council of Elders, for example, are very primary when it comes to issues of decision-making. You know, everybody has to be involved when it comes to making decisions, because it's always a matter of life and death. It's about survival. It's about surviving those terrains. So everybody's decision has to be taken into consideration. This is contrary to also what we hear a lot about, you know, elders imposing, or they become sort of this patriarchal nature. What we see, what you may see physically, you know, manifest, may be elders coming and sitting down and making decisions. But there are other mechanisms which, for example, women and young people participate or contribute in terms of providing solutions and decisions. So it doesn't necessarily have to be them sitting at the you know, under the tree to decide, right? So there is a strategy in which everybody's voice gets to be heard, and it may not necessarily be what the Western style kind of people in terms of inclusion may look like, right? So that's one of the things. And there are examples. I think somebody was talking about, you know, I think that was the lady you had before. What was her name? The lady from Kenya, where she mentioned about
Faith.
Yes, Faith, talking about, you know, the elders are discussing, and there's a lady who is coming to bring in the food, and she sort of hears it, and now she gets to be brought on board. So that is one of the ways. But also, even before they come to the floor of under the tree, the elders, they have come from a house somewhere with a woman, and they always have to consult the woman what they think. You know, there's a community in the coastal part of Kenya where the women sit inside the house and the meeting is happening outside. And they sit, you know, near the wall, and they're covered, you know, they're very, you know, conservative. And the men are having heated discussions outside. And so if you're a passerby, you'll be like, why are these men talking and the women are not there? What you don't know is from time to time, one man will run into the house and will ask for the, you know, the opinions of the ladies who are seated there, and you know, what do you think of it? And then they run back. So it's just what you do not see happening. But indeed, there are places where women's voices are heard. And I don't think culture is necessary. This culture is necessarily, you know, bad, or you know, there are certain aspects, yes, but in general, when it comes to decision-making, communal decision-making is a survival strategy for the indigenous peoples, right? So for pastoralists, okay, so now, and then the other thing about pastoralists is that in general, they are trained, you are trained at a young age to cultivate large social networks, which they value as much as their livestock. So for us, livestock is king, right? So the cows, the more you have, the more powerful you are. But also, so is social networks. So you have to know your aunties, you have to know your clansmen, you have to know the people who you share the same totem with. You have to know also, you know, the other community who share the same sort of totem or identity as you. So these large alliance of networks or social networks really are key when it comes to survival. And so what that tells you is that these people really value collaboration and, you know, being able to share with one another. So now when it comes to now peace building and what we've seen in the past, a lot of the peace building, you know, that happens in our region, in indigenous people's territories, which a lot of conflicts are happening, are really sort of drawn from the West, right? And experiences and research in international development and conflict resolution fields. But really, there's really little that is known or that is documented about indigenous peoples, what they're doing in terms of bringing peace to their own communities. So a lot of what you see is Western style types of conflict resolution being brought and being tried and tested in the indigenous people territory. But researchers are also really focusing a lot on, ethnography and anthropology. And really there is no sort of transdisciplinary research that is conducted or really looking into Indigenous space building. And I'll share one example of Indigenous sort of method that has been tried in Kenya, and it sort of worked, right? So dialogue and facilitation processes are more pronounced in our Indigenous people's territories than mediation. So the formal style mediation, where there's somebody who is identified as a mediator. So what happens a lot is more conversations between two warring groups. There may not necessarily be a mediator, but there is that constant conversation and relationship between people. So now I'll go and share about a process that happened in Kenya, and then maybe there are some lessons that can be learned in that process in terms of really understanding that whereas there are different ways of resolving disputes, there is also some contribution that is coming from Indigenous peoples in Kenya. And I'll go to Laikipia County, which it was a conflict between the Pokot and the Samburu. So the story is that in 2006, there was a war that broke out between the Pokot and the Samburu over a proposed wildlife conservancy that was being set up in an area that each of the communities was like laying claim to it, right? So for the next 3 years, there was like relentless fighting and conflict and people dying. It reached its peak on 15th of September 2009, when there was like in one day, 41 people lost their lives, including 21 women and children who were caught in the crossfire. So one of the cultural virtues, or what we believe in, is that women and children should not be involved in fighting, right? So we believe that they are innocent, they should be protected. And even when the both sides that are fighting, if you find women or children, you cannot harm them, right? It's a cultural thing. And you'll also find that even among the Somali, when it comes to, for example, reparations or payments for, if, for example, if a man is killed, there's a certain number of camels that you're supposed to be, the victims are supposed to be paid. But if you look at them, if a woman is killed, there's 0 camels that are supposed to be paid. For somebody from outside, you may think like these people don't value the life of a woman. Why is there no value in terms of the number of camels that the perpetrator is supposed to pay? And the explanation is women are not supposed to be killed whatsoever, whichever side of it. So we don't even negotiate, we don't even think about it. So that's why the rules are set and women are not supposed to be killed. So in this particular one, when 21 women and children were butchered, that is when the conscience of everybody was like, whoa, we have to do something. So what happened is, of course, the immediate reaction, which happens in all conflicts in Kenya, the immediate thing is government coming in with force, with armored vehicles and police and sometimes military. And there's a shoot to kill order where there's no regard for whoever is going to suffer, just blanket punishment for the communities. You'll also see a lot of, officials, government officials, humanitarian organizations flying in and out with choppers and helicopters and making pronouncements. We call people to cease and, let's hostilities, cease and let's see, like something done. Or, public demands. So there are demonstrations or, just more of stop. But really nothing happens, right? So what happened here is now when this massacre happened in 2009 in a place called Kanampiu, the professionals from this territory, and by professionals, I mean like myself, people from the soil, from that region, who have somehow managed to get an education and they are now living in the cities and they're working in the cities and major towns of Kenya. So those are the professionals in this case. They said, let's see what we can do. let's call government to demand for action. So the professionals from this area went to the member of parliament who had an office in Nairobi, and basically, said, what do we need? Can you do something as a member of parliament from this region? And the member of parliament told them, it is so nice to see what government is doing, but what are we doing, right? As the sons and daughters of this area, what are we doing? We know the people who are there. Where are the other? So the Samburus are the ones who went to this particular member of parliament, and they say, where are your counterparts from the other tribe that you know? Because we are very sure you know. And now that's the thing, that in Nairobi, I know a lot of other indigenous groups. I almost know almost everybody from the other indigenous tribes who are working and living in Nairobi. And this is also based on that idea of social networks that we have grown up with. That when I see somebody in the street who is Samburu or Turkana, I automatically associate or relate with them and will say hi to them, right? So they said, somebody, people who are in this town, can you meet and see what you can do something, right? So now things started rolling, right? So mind you that these are two ethnic groups who are fighting, and there are all these fears about now me as Dorina going to look for another ethnic group who I know maybe their relatives have been killed by my people. So there was that fear from the beginning, but nevertheless, this particular member of parliament became sort of that go-between in terms of helping bring people together, right?
But Dorina, what was the actual issue there? What you said, wildlife conservancy. But
Yes,
what was the issue?
So there was a proposition to have a wildlife conservancy in a certain land. And this land is being claimed by each of the tribes that was their grazing area. So there was no way this was going to be a wildlife conservancy. So the area that I'm talking about also, if you know about Laikipia, that is where there's a lot of wildlife conservation work that is mainly driven by the British. So a lot of the land there, the locals have somewhat lost ownership of the land. So there's a lot of private conservancies, private lodges and hotels. They're big, there's a military training for the British military and the Kenya military. So a lot of the land has been taken for this private conservation work. And now these Pokot and the Samburu communities, they rely mainly on the land to graze, right? And also for their cultural and, cultural work, when it's prayers or other uses, because they still utilize that land for their cultural purposes. But now over time with development and all of these other things, somebody said, let's have this land as part of, let's develop a wildlife conservancy as part of conservation. So, of course, now they all say, this is our land, we are not going to allow it. And the other one said, this is also our land, we are not going to allow it. So they started clashing amongst each other. So it became a sort of like a protracted conflict for a very long time. And they became became enemies for a very long time. So now what happened is the professionals who are now living in the city said, we cannot sit because this one is getting out of hand. In one afternoon, you have 41 people dead, while on this other side, it's almost like there is no end in sight in terms of finding peace and them peacefully resolving their disputes. And also just to mention that a lot of these indigenous people's territories, there's a lot of small arms and light weapons that are in civilian hands. Of course, the sources vary depending on who you talk to. They are mainly unprotected territories, and people, pick up firearms to defend themselves, because also there's a lot of security vacuum. At least for the previous years, there has been a lot of vacuum in terms of government providing security for its people. So people pick up arms to defend their lives and to protect their, their families, right? So in terms of access to firearms, people have access to firearms. Of course, they say that there's a lot of, it's been contributed a lot by the instability in the Horn of Africa, the conflicts in South Sudan, in Somalia, and, in the early 90s, 80s in Uganda. So there was an influx of small arms into people's hands, but people still continue to access firearms even to date. So also that speaks to, corruption and other issues that are sort of, it's an opportunity for people to sell firearms and be rich. So basically that is what happened. Now everything is burning, and so one of the things that they did was they now. So the other thing about the professionals, and when I talk about professionals, is us who are in the towns, is that there is a lot of evidence that actually shows that they also play a part in terms of financing some of the conflicts. So in a conflict like this one that happened, for example, the first thing that would happen is my family would call me and they would say, we have been attacked. We need some kind of money of financing to access maybe more ammunition or to, plan other attacks or to feed the people who are fighting. So professionals also have been blamed for contributing or financing some of the conflicts like the one that happened, or just being on the fence and taking sides with your community instead of really being sort of like a neutral and helping sort out the situation. So what happened was these guys now said, okay, now we have to do something. So the beginning was to start building relationships with each other in Nairobi. So whoever had issues with each other, they had to sort it out. We had to know like who are the spoilers, who are people who could distract the process when it starts in terms of going to the ground. We needed to map out who is, for example, still engaged actively in maybe financing or giving orders in terms of communities continuing to fight. So really mapping and making people clear out their issues in Nairobi and in other towns before they hit the ground. And then the next thing now became hitting the ground. And this time, the whole idea was, you're playing with people's psychology. You are going with the other ethnic group and standing side by side. So first of all, that is like a first demonstration for people to like, oh, okay, we cannot shoot, we cannot engage actively because our kids are on that side. And also secondly, it must mean something that these people are standing with our perceived enemies, right? So they may not be as bad after all, right? So that was the first thing, that just going there physically and standing side by side and saying, we are your sons and daughters. We have come and we are here to help us get out of this situation that we are in. And then now there were some rules, some ground rules, which were set by the professionals. And one of the one that, for example, I like was the idea of everybody sitting on the ground. Unlike in the past, and unlike other mediators who come and you call for a mediation session in a hotel, under the air conditioning and, having teas and tea breaks and whatnot, everybody went and sat on the ground. You don't carry a chair. Whether you are an MD in a bank in Nairobi or what have you, everybody sits on the ground with the community. Of course, there was this whole process of you go first of all and meet your group, your ethnic group, and then you sort out, and then before you bring in everybody together. But when it happened in terms of communities coming together, everybody was sitting on the ground. And the whole idea was you want to be able to manage the whole of, community standing and influence, or being blinded by positions, because there were people who were very influential. So you want to be ensured that this is an equal playing ground. It also meant that it broke that culture of the elders being the bosses, right? Or in terms of they are the ones who speak more than the youth or the women. So everybody sat on the ground. Everybody was given enough time to speak and to air their views, right? And then also the other thing was the professionals we may not necessarily have gone through professional sort of training in terms of mediation training. These are bankers, these are teachers, these are security guards. Basically, everybody brought their skill. And the main skill was what you have learned growing up in terms of we have to maintain peace because it's our only way of survival, right? You have to create collaboration and networks and friendships because it's the only way of conversation. So that was like the common playing ground. And then the other thing that happened was now all of a sudden things started to shift. So first of all, you have built already, you've gone there to the ground, you're meeting with the people, you're already building a network of other people who could help in terms of diffusing tension or getting information, whether it's rumor or truth. You get everybody together so that it helps you assess, how is this conflict happening and what strategies are you going to use to make sure that you are diffusing some of the misinformation that is coming. And then, as I mentioned to you, professionals really were key in terms of modeling inter-ethnic cooperation and friendship. So under the trees and in the bushes, you eat together, you sleep there together because there are no fancy hotels. It's in the bush, it's in the middle of nowhere. You really model that idea of cooperation and friendship. And it went further because there are people who have, you've met somebody in Nairobi and you've fallen in love, now you're married. It went further now to saying, you also want to show that if there are people who intermarried, that is a perfect time to show, some of them have children, some of them are doing very well. So you show that we are really maintaining that collaboration and friendship. And then there was now this issue of inclusion of women and youth. And this is also unlike, the traditional assumption about indigenous peoples that women are not involved. For the first time, women and youth were given a chance to really speak very passionately about what this conflict meant for them. And now, for example, this picture of this woman is called Mama Amani. She's very famous in Laikipia now. And she's part now of a peace committee. This woman spoke about, which nobody had ever talked about, the effects of women being widows when the men die. The effect of women having to bury their sons when they're the Morans, the ones who are involved in the war, die. So there was really this vivid picture that women painted that sort of influenced the outcome of this process. And for me, I feel like this particular process became very key and pivotal in ensuring that women actually, their voices are heard and they're given a chance to speak. And the other thing was, which of course we borrow from the mediation process, is that everybody speaks without being interrupted. So there was all this vivid, horrific description of events that actually made people say, there's no way this conflict is going to go on, and we have to find a solution, a lasting solution to it. And the young people also talked about, how they're driven by, this idea to prove themselves that they are the warriors. In essence, they are scared. They are worried about what their mothers will feel like when they see their dead bodies being, brought to their house, to their homesteads. And they were really feeling bad and the guilty that they go with them to the grave about, how their mothers are going to suffer for the rest of their lives. So vivid descriptions of events with the, both different communities listening to it became like a sort of like a changing moment. And there are other issues also, like, some wisdom that was shared by the elders, by the women, sort of nuances that goes back to really reinforcing that aspect of, of cooperation. There's one, for example, that says that a man would say, for example, now, you cannot start, because a lot of the time the government was coming in with force, and people are asking why are we still fighting? And they said, how can you start engaging in peace building with a gun strapped around your shoulder, right? So there's a policeman there, or the head of security, and he has a gun strapped and he's talking about you need to maintain peace. That is impossible. And also the same for them is also to demonstrate how they are afraid, they're driven by fear. So everybody has their gun and they're talking about peace. So they said, unless we put down our weapons and start engaging, then we are not going to go anywhere. And then now there are other things like, the different ethnic groups sharing meals together. So, for example, one of the things about the Samburu is the Morans. The Morans are the young people who are sort of like the protectors of the community. They are not yet married, but they are like the youth. They don't eat with everybody, right? So usually they eat by themselves. So this was an opportunity for them also to eat with their counterparts on the other side and share meals together and really start having to bond together. And then also the elders, they said, okay, now that we have sort of engaged and we somehow understand that we actually share a lot in common, we might as well go and share our sacred places. Let's go and make our prayers together. If it is even before the meetings, one of the persons can from the Pokot will share a prayer, and then after that another one will share a prayer. So in essence, what I'm trying to say in summary here is that the professionals played a very pivotal role. They knew that the solutions in terms of addressing the conflict, of course, later on the conflict was resolved. There were some agreements. For example, everybody decided to tool down their weapons. There was an agreement about, where the sort of the conservancy was going to be happening and how they were going to be able to share in terms of grazing, how they're going to allow their livestock to go in. But it went further even to other peace dividends, like, repair, coming together to repair a watering hole that was broken because of the years and years of conflict, and nobody was allowed to go and water their animals because they were afraid. So now they said, you're going to repair this and you're going to make sure that people, there's a schedule, a calendar where at this particular time, this group is coming to water their animals and the other will come and water their animals. They also decided to build a border school just between the two communities, and they call it a peace school, where kids from the two different communities and the other communities who are around there also were allowed to bring their kids. So for me, I want to underscore the role of the professionals here. They may not have been your typical mediators, but first of all, they understood the culture, they understood the context, they knew the dynamics that are happening in the communities, and they did serve as a third-party neutrals, right? And they're really making sure that all these meetings were geared towards finding a solution. And the other thing was, of course, the whole process was conducted in the local dialect, the local language, which is understood by everybody. So that is also another key aspect, that there's no way you can come to this group and start speaking to them in English or Kiswahili, or even if you rely on a translator, it sort of can get lost in the process. So really making sure that the local dialect is good because it helps people to build trust and understanding. And when people see their sons and daughters sort of becoming the neutrals in both sides and leading the process, it sort of continues to build that trust. So today, now what has happened there? So, the last slide. So yeah, so these people are now living harmoniously. There is a lot of intermarriages. There's a lot of shared markets. There's a lot of children going to school. Although I'm not saying that conflicts have ended in that area, but what I'm saying is that the conflicts that are in that area have mainly been for fighting with other communities. This took, when there is, for example, I'm afraid to say this, but there was an invasion of private ranches a few years ago, even last year. And these communities came together and actually went in together. So even if, well, some people call it invasion, and others don't call it invasion because they said they basically were accessing places where traditionally they were meant to graze their animals, is that they work together. There has been no conflict between the Pokot and the Samburu of Laikipia West. They're cooperating more. And the committees that were set up during that process are still engaged with one another. They meet every Monday, and they have regular sort of sessions where they build, they update each other on what is happening, and they're now engaged in other activities to really foster, themselves and to develop themselves. And they still refer back to the sons and daughters who came from Nairobi to come and help them to sort out their conflicts. So for me, when I reflect on that, it's really an opportunity for mediators to really factor in certain issues about Indigenous peoples, which is one, understanding the context in which they are operating. I am sure that the description I gave about the Indigenous peoples' territories in Kenya is applicable to almost all the other territories inhabited by Indigenous peoples. So really understanding the context, the dynamics that are happening, and being culturally sensitive. And the best people who are culturally sensitive are people who are from that area. They have more nuanced understanding that even if you were to learn from books, you'll not really understand, because these are things that are ingrained in you from when you were born, right? And then the other thing is there's a lot of when somebody is in Indigenous people's context, there are a lot of informal influences that you may not be able to pick as a mediator, and that are key in terms of finding a long-term solution, unlike following a formal sort of process. So really understanding the informal influences of particular groups over formal mediation processes. There are places where you just go and meet one person and it changes the whole dynamic and conflict is solved. And that comes with understanding the more about the informal processes, informal dynamics that are happening, unlike the formal processes and or sort of like checking the box. What we have seen in a lot of the conflicts, and unfortunately, the local peace agreements, for example, that come out of inter-ethnic conflicts in Kenya, they're mainly drafted by civil servants who they just come and they meet with the community and they draft papers in English, and they take the paper, it has the government logo there, and they expect that this is going to last. A lot of the agreements go unsaid, they go unwritten, and they have lasted more than those that are put on paper, because there's a lot more of buy-in and trust and really understanding and being grounded in the realities and the ways of the Indigenous peoples. Keep in mind that a lot of these stories have been passed orally. So like the story I have mentioned about the Kanampiu massacre, there was no formal agreement per se, there was no written agreement. But after all the ceremonies, all the things that happened, all the conversations, everybody committed to it, and that was that. Of course, now later on, people have come to research and do some work around it. So, so what is going to be key, I don't know, but it's something that we can discuss, is whether these, of course, things are changing now, the conflicts are changing, there's more large-scale sort of conflicts when it comes to, they're talking about, extractives and energy and large-scale acquisition of land for other purposes by private and governments. I don't know whether our Indigenous ways are going to sustain it, because the players are coming in from outside and they may not really understand the context. So what I would propose is really continuing to increase this idea of formalization or institutionalization of some of the initiatives, even at the community level, so that, even when they're engaging later on, it becomes sort of, it has some kind of legitimacy, it increases their legitimacy. So if it is that structure, for example, where the professionals and the elders and everybody meets, there has to be some kind of formalization, so that when it comes to now dealing with the bigger players and in terms of resolving disputes, they have some kind of legitimacy and they can be listened to. Unfortunately, it's going to be really an uphill task when it comes to addressing the bigger scale conflicts. However, the small scale conflicts that really involve around relations for people who are within the same territory. Those are things that are manageable. But it's a question I think I'll just pose to people really. What are the indigenous people going to do when it comes to dealing with big external players? Yeah, so I think Vikram, I'll stop there. And maybe
there was a last slide. I thought there was a slide after that. Was there? No, that was the last slide.
No, it's not there. It's fine.
No, I think that's a wonderful, model that, of course, that's a practical model because it worked. So I think that's a very good thing, a learning thing for everyone. And I think, look, the fact being that you might think there are other larger conflicts where things have to be looked at maybe differently or how it's going to happen. I think it has to happen in this organic way that the people would come in. There is no concept of all this training qualification for the mediators. It is a natural thing, and those are the things that people must have brought onto the whole whatever, let's call it a mediation only. That whole mediation, it happened, or just the fact of conversations happening, the dialogue happening, to be able to facilitate that. It came naturally to some people. They actually facilitated that, but also at the same time having the trust. I mean, to develop that trust comes from a lot of factors. So what the factors for each person was, why did some people trust some people? So those are things which it has to happen organically. I think that's the way it has to happen, to say that, okay, now this person will throw into this whole conflict and this person will be your mediator. I don't think that really works. There is so much more that's happening there. So that's why this whole thing that I've been trying to put across, that let communities identify their own people who have the mediator mindset. Let's take those people with us and let's be able to create this whole environment that we have these people. This is something that you should try out, and it is not something that something's being imposed on you, has come from outside. It is you sitting together. So I think this shows that this works. I mean, when people, first of all, look, the intentions were good. So the professionals definitely had good intentions when they came in, and then people, I think they can sense that. They can sense good intention first, and once good intentions come in, trust comes in. So those are important things. It's not really a professional activity. In the sense, these are professions, but this activity is not like a professional activity that I've come in for this time and I'm charging you for this time, and now sit down and I have to do this in 2 days. And no, doesn't work. It's a relationship thing. You're building it up. You're understanding who to talk to. So I think that these are things which we have to, I think, take forward. And I think, I mean, I feel that it's a really good model that people were able to put together, and it worked. I think really good. But tell me, the settlement agreement that I mean, whatever settlement that they had, if so, what is actually the sanctity of that in terms of the government coming in and endorsing it, or what really happens with that when these people get together and they resolve something?
Yeah, so a lot of the times, first of all, a lot of the times it's a lot of the agreements are not necessarily written, but they are spoken, and everybody takes note of that. And a lot of the responsibility in terms of implementation of the agreements lies on the community. So, and whatever is for the state, for the government, for example, if it is provision of security so that people don't have to protect themselves, then that becomes communicated through the local governments. However, I must say that there has not been really that much commitment in terms of the implementation of those recommendations, because a lot of these things also go with money, right? So when it comes to, for example, building a school or repairing a broken well or something, it has monetary value, and oftentimes that does not follow through because just somehow money gets channeled to other aspects. So there are small initiatives that communities will take on and they will implement, but the bigger picture don't get implemented. And unfortunately, this becomes then the reason for another cycle of conflict, because recommendations are passed, and then the duty bearers don't implement them. There is a very good case of an ongoing conflict in northern Kenya, in Marsabit, which is bordering Ethiopia, but is an internal inter-ethnic conflict. It has even gone on to the head of state, where he's basically called the leaders from that area, the elders and the religious group and the professionals, and said, you know, I'm giving you 100 days to implement something, or to give me a raft of measures that will be taken to ensure that harmony and peace is restored. And there was a whole lot of, you know, recommendations in terms of what needs to be done for the conflict to stop. And it's very all good on paper. Indeed, these are the things we need to do. So everybody knows what needs to be done. However, when it comes to now budgetary allocation to some of the to ensuring some of the recommendations are done, it stops there. Nobody sort of is keen to ensure that actually that goes through. So it becomes the same cycle of violence, and then the government goes back to force and disarmament and all these other issues, and then it sort of like becomes a status quo, you know. So that's a challenge.
But that's what I'm thinking, that in these kind of situations, that at what stage do you bring in the other players? Because there are other people who are definitely, they should be part of it. So of course, within the community, they've reached that point. Now, who are the other people who should be under the tree, or not on the table, which you have heard from my discussion, under the tree or in the bush, I don't know. So who are supposed to should be there to bring them at what stage? I think that's also, I think, an important aspect of it. But you said, Dorina, you said this is not your typical mediator. These are your typical mediators. It worked. The other one is
the thing is, nobody ever mentioned the word mediator, or, you know, knows. If you ask somebody what is mediation, they'll not tell you that. And they don't necessarily have a certification or training in mediation. But they understand somehow the process, and they have that respect for the culture and how things are done, and somehow they're able to, you know, to drive the discussions and the conversations going towards a more lasting solution.
That's what I keep saying, that I'm saying that if you just connect people with the process, they know the process. And once they know the process, they first of all know who those people are who can actually assist in the process. They know that, look, the word mediator, but you said that in those languages, maybe there is no word for it. So you were saying something about that.
Yeah, I don't know the word for mediator in any of the languages. I have asked around, nobody can tell you, like, you know, it's always a description, you know, a definition. It's always like a whole sentence of, you know, or it's always equated to the elders, to the council of elders. That's the mediator, or the akireket, or you know, so those are the groups where elders come and meet, or the dare among the Shona people of Zimbabwe. So there's no specific word for mediator, and a lot of the things that happen is, you know, the elders are sort of like the holders of conflict resolution. So they may not necessarily be mediators, but somehow mediation is equated to the work that they do in terms of dispute resolution.
Well, I think the first thing is to be able to explain to them, when we are talking about mediation, not the word, but what is the process that we are talking about. But that is why I put out in my posts also that I am looking at the definition in the Singapore Convention for what we are going to use in the symposium, because of the broad nature of it. Because sometimes what happens is then some people start, like, I mean, you hear a lot of places, they will say mediation is only the facilitative process. They will not suggest a solution. Some people have that issue, but I'm saying let's get out of all that. That definition is so nice, whatever name you call it, however the process is conducted, just that the third person that you bring in doesn't have the authority to impose a solution. So if we put this out to people and say, I mean, this is what mediation is, please tell us who does it in your community, who are those people, you'll get names. Because why, Dorina, I'm saying this? Because my next stage of those mediation circles, that World Mediation Circle, that will require this question to go out and bring out those people who have that natural ability, and we'll take them together and create this whole environment that these people exist and you should do it, because those things are changing. And the morning I had someone from Afghanistan, and she was talking about how things have changed over time. The respect for those people, the elders as such who used to do it, there they call them the white beard, the people who do that. So
Yeah.
so the respect for them has, of course, that has got affected. So why has
Mm.
that happened? Can we also understand that? Because I think it's not just a matter of promoting mediation. It is
Yeah.
also the sociological changes which have happened in those communities, to start looking at that. And I think to maybe, I don't know how it's going to happen, how we will be able to explain to them, but that whole community feeling, and to maybe build communities, I think that by itself is something that we might need to do. I don't know about how you must be
Yeah.
doing some work there.
Yeah. Okay. Now let me just speak about the changing role of the elders. It is indeed true, even for our context. The role of the elders is changing significantly. They are no longer as influential. A long time ago, elders would sanction an attack, like a raid or something, a cattle raid. Now they can't do that because the youth, for example, have easy access to firearms. So, and they somehow don't listen to the elders anymore. So the elders have lost their ability to sort of influence them in that aspect. But there are also other changing dynamics. When we had, this devolved system of government, when we passed the 2010 constitution in Kenya, now we had a local level leadership. So the county governments, the governor, for example, became sort of like the elder, because he's the one who is in charge of everybody. And oftentimes, the people who are working with the county governments are young people, and they are the ones who are making decisions. So the role of the elder shifted there. And then when it comes to conflict, a lot of the times elders have become compromised. So aside that now, sometimes they are no longer balanced in terms of their judgments. They are influenced by money. So some who would be, accused of corruption and taking bribes from one side, blessing. Now, when it comes to even politics, they are sort of involved at the center of deciding who becomes the governor, and it depends on who gives them the biggest check. So there are all these dynamics that are changing in terms of the role of the elders. But the adoption of more young people becoming leaders. So leadership is no longer equivalent to the elders, but people who have gone to school, they have an education, that those ones become the leaders of the community, and somehow they have some influence and they're listened to. So in that respect, then the elders have become less influential. However, there is now an attempt to make sure they are incorporated into governance, and they become advisors, or somehow they play a certain role in terms of governance and ensuring that they continue their work. That's one. And then the second thing I wanted to mention was that in our Kenyan context, if you talk about mediation, or who is a mediator, everybody thinks about Kofi Annan, who mediated the 2007, 2008 post-election violence in Kenya. So mediation is thought of more as a high-level formal process, and it's not, and it's also not open. It's not in the open. Nobody knows what happens in the decisions and the discussions that happen. But at the end of the day, they come for a press conference and they say, these are the things we have agreed on. But people don't have access to the inner, discussions, what happened, how each side was trying to make a case for themselves. So that is how people equate mediation. That is more of a formal process. And also now that is what happens even when mediators now come to the ground, because they want to play Kofi Annan, this formal process, and really without understanding that, maybe that setting is different from what we are trying to do here.
Dorina, we have to change all that. That perspective, the perception that people have, we have to change it. That this is not what you understand for mediation, because that part of it, we have to see how much of that has really been successful. That model, whatever, let's call it a modern, whatever method, how much has that been successful, and how much has the whole traditional method of working with the community in a very different way where you're making everyone part of it, because everyone needs to be part of it. Because if you want a long-term solution, if you don't keep, if you keep some people out of it, definitely it's not going to be long-term. So I don't know whether if you heard that one with Alicia yesterday. I was talking about, can we look at even things like YouTube? Can we have discussions being available to anyone, anywhere, so that they at least feel that there are no closed door things happening there. They should feel that yes, this is a transparent thing happening and it's for everyone's good.
Yeah, yeah, I think I heard that about, you guys doing virtual mediation. Yeah, I think that is another way to look at it. Because the other thing also is that a lot of mediation, I think it sort of involves like small groups of people. But when it comes to now, when you're dealing with a large group, it makes sense to have virtual sort of mediation sessions.
Yeah.
I think with the time you're going to sort out the network connection and all of that. But indeed, I think those are opportunities really, so that everybody can have access to information and know what is discussed. Part of inclusivity.
Because what we were really discussing, of course, her point was also right, that there is a certain number of people you can actually, in a way, deal with online. Because first of all, our screens are limited as to how many people you can see on the screen. And I think you need to see everyone, then works out. So that's why some hybrid thing will have to be worked out. Definitely, because I want, when you have communities being affected, I want everyone to feel a part of it. Because it is very easy to create a divide in communities by saying, oh, that person is doing something there against your interest or whatever, and that can break things up. So I think that way we'll have to work out. But because you were saying, look, interesting things like that ceremony that they have there, so before they start, now you said that a certain prayer is said. So what is that prayer? I mean, what is there a
yes local yeah, so the prayer is sort of a general prayer, and it's almost like every meeting that any Indigenous person's meeting, at least in the context I work in, there has to be an initial prayer. And the prayer is just mainly about thanking God for the land, thanking God for the resources that are there, and connecting with the Supreme Being, because they know that there's somebody else who is supreme, and they ask for, good judgment when it comes to making decisions. So they sort of invite the God, and they also invite the other mediums, the ancestors and everybody, that now this is a meeting that we are calling, and we're inviting all of you to come and listen to this session and to give us your blessings. And if there's something that we don't agree on, let us know. But most importantly is really praying for abundance and, blessings of God, because the territory they live in also is very harsh. So most of the times the praying will be like, give us rain, give us more rain, and so that our animals don't die, or so that we continue to live, something like that. So blessings, basically, and grounding everybody in that space. So it's always a very sacred moment. And the prayer is not just one person praying. So it's almost like you pray and then other people respond, right? So you say something and then everybody else, like, we agree with that. And then, so it can be somehow emotional sometimes, but it's really a nice way of centering everybody and bringing people together in sort of the same space.
Yeah, that's really important. I think it's really nice. I mean, the whole concept, which is what Alicia was talking about yesterday there also, the whole idea being that, of course, in terms of ancestors, yes, that aspect is also quite common between what you have in Indigenous communities. I think that part of it is, I think it's important to put that across, that these are things that are important to these people. It's like I said, you can come up with formal processes, but what use are they if they don't connect people? This simple prayer that you're saying, that will, of course, connect people. I think these are things we need to highlight. I think, Dorina, we need to highlight these things instead of putting them at the back and say no, because this is something that is a sentiment of theirs which needs to be, they need to connect with that. But the only thing that you use the word neutral there as being neutrals. I'm going away from that word. I don't
Okay. Okay, no, I don't know what other word to use, because the idea is
this is a word that people use, but I think this is an outdated concept. If a person is, I'm saying impartial. If the person is impartial, whether the person has certain affiliation to one side or doesn't, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It is an impartial person. And because when you say neutral, I'll tell you finally what will happen. Then you'll get an external person, and that will not be a good thing, because in some way these people whom you bring in, these professionals that you had, are connected to that community. Each community, it's not that they will not have certain sentiments or whatever, but they can remove that aspect of it. That is the important part, that you can actually you have those thoughts maybe, but here you are sitting in a very impartial way. That is the whole quality of a mediator, to be able to go beyond all that. So that's why I am saying, because I'm telling you that neutral word will then get associated with people who are not at all connected with this, which will not work, because these people are connected. That's why they can understand and they can explain to each other. So that's why I have an issue with that with you. I'm sure you.
Okay. No, that is what I actually implied, that they become impartial, they don't take sides per se, or even if they do, but they don't show that, because you have to maintain that trust that you are becoming now the sort of the middle person. That's why I said third party. But yeah, I think I appreciate your thought on that and your comment, and I think I'll not use that neutral again. And I like the fact that you're saying then it means that another person will have to come in as an outsider. So impartial indeed is what I was trying to imply.
Because when I keep saying, because identifying, when I say keep identifying those with the mediator mindset, this goes with the mediator mindset, that it doesn't matter. I'm saying, say in a family also, you might be a part of that family and you might have affiliations to one side or one person. You should know, for a person with the mediator mindset, doesn't matter. You can be right in the heart of it. Even your own, you might have your own interest in it, but still you can look at it objectively. That is what a mediator mindset is. To not be swayed by any kind of whatever your affiliations or anything, not at all. Those are, so you don't need, like I keep saying, you don't need training from outside. That is why everyone is right there, but you have to identify them. And in the sense, we don't have to identify them. People have already identified them. So in your family, in your community, we just have to get them out and people to value them. If things have changed over time, why have they changed, to be able to bring that out. So so I think that's, but tell me, in terms of the whole, I mean, again, the colonizers and the colonization aspect, which we of course will discuss in the next symposium, definitely, but how much of that divide and rule policy has affected communities in Kenya? Because colonizer had a divide and rule policy. So how was that used, and how has that affected the relationship, and how has that made it more difficult to actually mediate?
Definitely, it did have a lot of influence. First of all, it's it sort of made the indigenous people's territory become marginalized. So there was a policy which was that their regions were not productive. They were sort of like the buffer zones, particularly during the colonial times, against the invasion of, for example, the Italians from Somalia. So this particular territory was sort of cut off and it was left, to itself. So the colonial policies affected the development of indigenous people's territories. And we are trying to reverse that by, making sure that there are affirmative action resources that is going to really make sure that that region is brought to the same level. So that division indeed affected the development, and it affected now everything else when it comes to conflicts, because, with no development, there's conflict, right? So we would attribute conflicts in the region to historical, systemic government marginalization of that area.
No, please. You were saying something.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that so they actually sort of led to the area being underdeveloped, because they chose that was not a high priority, high potential area for them. So all the government resources were only concentrated in the these other parts of the country. And now the same narrative also continues to be perpetuated by, the people from this other side of Kenya, that, basically actually even there's a media research that was conducted, and even media itself, when it comes to identifying with Indigenous peoples, the definitions of some of the words they use is, conflict, poverty, troublemakers. They're just difficult to deal with. So there's a narrative that already people in this other side of the world have about the Indigenous peoples. So it becomes very difficult, even in terms of policy and changing things, for them to be able to catch up. And then, of course, there are some communities who really, fought the British. So those ones also they still feel like colonialism was not good for the country. It was not good for the because there has been also now the whole idea of the boundaries, people fighting with each other because this is the claims that this is our boundary, this is our area. But before that, it was very clear that, we continue to use the same resources and we can cross the border without any problem. But now this sort of walls, these invisible walls that have been created by colonialism, continues to also make people fight over resources and control of territory.
Yeah, because this country, but in terms of the political situation, do the Indigenous people look? When you said that some of them are not even given the whatever, in a way,
the
ID. So whether they have the part of the political process or not, that's one part which will happen. Then otherwise, in relation to numbers, there will be some who will have a say in the politics because the numbers will be large. Again, I'm saying finally it comes to the divide and rule policy, which obviously we can't. So
this idea of democracy is with numbers, and the minority people have to suffer. And it's actually true. Now you're talking about that, and it makes me really unhappy. We are also in a political environment now. We are waiting for the president to be announced, the new president of Kenya to be announced, and we are all anxious. But what was happening is, and what happens is, there are places which are known to have the numbers. And so the numbers also follow resources. So you'll find that some counties are so developed, they have a lot of funding from the government, from the shared revenue. And then the Indigenous people's territories, which have all this potential that I mentioned about, the largest part of the country being in the dark, there is no connection to electricity, despite the fact that the largest wind energy in Africa is found in Indigenous people's territories in Kenya, despite the fact that the oil exploration is in Indigenous people's territories. So despite the fact that they contribute significantly to the economy, but because there is this idea of the majority people have a go, then the Indigenous people's territories suffer in terms of development, and them contributing to, continuing to develop and really enjoy their rights as Kenyans. So there's almost these two sides of, like there is a real Kenyan and then there's like the second-class citizen, and those are the Indigenous peoples. I tell you, if you're driving from Nairobi to Marsabit, for example, the moment you cross where it's perceived to be sort of like safer for Kenya, then you start being stopped. Every stop you have to be checked. You have to check your ID. There are genuine concerns with security, but for me, it's like it should be applicable across the board to other parts of the country. But there's this assumption that certain people from certain parts of the country are like security threat, and so you're stopped on the bus, you have to be frisked, and then you stop again, you have to show your ID. There are places where you actually have to show even your, to prove your citizenship, showing your parents' identification or something like that. So it's really unfair. The Indigenous people continue to suffer this kind of second-class citizenship portrayal by the rest of the country. And it's a colonial thing. It's a colonial mindset. But we hope that things will continue to change as more and more Indigenous people also become aware about their rights. Like now there's a whole push, we are pushing for the registration of their community lands, and they can manage their own lands, and they can get into agreements if they want with external investors, or they can choose to utilize their land for grazing. It's up to them to decide and to push for their own self-determination. But this idea,
No, because that's why the symposium that I'm having in September is colonization, decolonization, and mediation. Because I see that we might say that, of course, the colonizer went away, but the decolonization also took the legacy from the colonizer, and that continued in the law and in the way they dealt with people. So definitely that part of it needs to be discussed. But in that sense, I think Kenya is still more progressive, isn't it? It's
Yes, we are. I can't deny that we are progressing. We are not doing badly off. Now there are, especially the indigenous groups, they have formed alliances and they have coalitions, and there are actually quite a substantial number, particularly now when you look at that map of Kenya. The elected officials from that area, they now have a group. There's a group called, for example, the Pastoralist Parliamentary Group. It's a very strong lobby group in parliament. And so when it comes to all legislations that come, they have the numbers and they really influence and make sure that the policies that are coming in and are being passed are pro-Indigenous. And also there are a lot of other Indigenous people's movements that are happening. Indigenous women councils are being formed, and they are meeting and they're building this kind of alliances and relationships and pushing for legislations. So in that case, then that means Kenya is sort of very open and allows people to sort of exercise their rights and organize and push for things that they believe in, and which we are really grateful, because we have come a long way in terms of really getting that space to advocate for rights of like Indigenous peoples. So Kenya is progressive, it's making progress, but of course we are still held by the history of colonialism, and we still have those policies that we are shedding off one step at a time.
Because I think the point is that the colonizers' policies were put in such a place that you could actually control people, and it gave you that whole structure. And that's why I'm saying the decolonization process was not the way it should have happened, because that structure was very good for the new colonizer. Let's see, I call them the new colonizers. It was very good for them. That structure was very good. But tell me, what is the situation with the election now? Have you reached a point where there is some?
No. So now we have, of course, the county level elections, the governors, the Senate, the members of parliament, and the local county assemblies. Those ones we have gotten most of them. We know who have won. But the presidential one, we are, of course, this time around, the courts, allowed for the sort of the results to be posted online. So there's an online portal where all the numbers are put, the results coming in from the local level. But now the computation and putting them together is taking a long time. So at the moment, we are not even half in terms of the National Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, the one in charge of the election, coming in with really giving us a definite number in terms of who the president is. However, today, we have had some groups meeting, and they are already declaring like they are as if they have won. So they are having this familiarization meeting and to celebrate, and they're already calling their candidate, His Excellency the President. It's really chaotic, but I think by Monday, hopefully by Monday, we'll have finished the numbers, because now this time this election commission is really keen, and they're taking their time. So hopefully by tomorrow or Monday, we will know who the president is.
What is the situation? But who's the one
far? Because so far, now everybody has access to the numbers, and you can do your own tallying and basically call the election. But so far, both sides have said they are the winner. So,
look, let me tell you. Give me just put this in perspective. You have only about 22 million people who vote. That's what I understand.
Yes. So
Okay,
So
now,
the eligible people are 22 million,
yes.
but I'm told the ones who showed up to actually vote was 14 million.
Which
So it
is
was not.
which is happening everywhere. The number of people who vote has come down drastically
Yeah.
everywhere, because whatever the reason, that's another story. But what I'm trying to say is all of your elections are happening with physical voting, with actually
Yes.
paper, which we have done away with.
Yeah.
Imagine a country like ours, which has 1.3 billion people. We have
Yeah.
electronic voting machines. The result comes out like that. I mean, it is so fast that can you imagine the scale? You were only 22 billion. We have 1.3. We are what 100,
Yeah.
1.3 billion. So imagine the
Wow.
difference, and we get the results like that. It's amazing how our process has really. I mean, this for us, your whole population, of course, in terms of voting, of course, is as much as my city.
I know, right? Yeah, but I don't know. Somehow it's taking forever. So what happened was, of course, we have the electronic voting also, the kids. But what happened was, in some places, some of those kits were not working because they rely on, the power charging and all of that. And, if you talk about the rural areas, they don't have access to that. So they had to go back to manual. And so now they also have to do the manual physical counting. And in addition to the electronic, the commission also has to physically receive the physical copies in Nairobi. So that is also now the other nightmare, that in addition to actually them receiving the soft copy immediately after the polls close, they also have to have the physical copy in Nairobi. So I don't know, but it's really creating a lot of anxiety. And yeah, but we, at least so far, it's peaceful. We are grateful. We'll wait and see. And also the other thing is the two main candidates are neck to neck. So there's also a likelihood of a rerun. So, but we'll see.
A lot's happening there. So Dorina, first of all, thank you very much. It was really, really nice talking to you. And of course, what you brought in, that whole, let's call it a model. I think that model needs to be working. I think I'm saying that by itself is good enough. You're saying it should be put into some formal something and all that. I don't think so. I think it's very nice, flexible process, which is available for people to see. So that's really nice. But any concluding remarks, please?
No, I don't have any concluding remarks other than to thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing. I went to your YouTube channel and I was just like, how did you get to do all of this? So it's really kudos to you. I think the mediation world and the peace building world could really use some of that material that you have online. So we'll be sure to make sure that we refer people to your channel and people subscribe and really make use of that rich material that you have. So yeah, I think that's my concluding remark. Really, I don't have anything else to say.
But I think the only problem is, how do you find the content? How do you? So that's why you go to mediatorvikram.com. I've tried to make it simple for you. So with the schedule of activities, you will find of course, how do you connect with me? That's one thing. So the symposium, you just click here, you'll get the entire schedule. So you get all the YouTube links for this particular symposium. Go down, this is the conference. You can click here. This is about 90 sessions. So you'll get a whole sheet which will open with the topic and the YouTube link. So this takes care of these one symposium and the other conference that took place. You will find this is the World Peacemakers Day celebration. So you find the YouTube link here. So similarly, if you just go down, I try to put the links there. So these are the various shows that I do. So this will take you to the playlist, the YouTube playlist for each of those shows. So there's a section on YouTube, the channel, there you will find the details of the people who were on these shows. So that lectures about mediation, there is a section which will tell you about that. So talking books is under that YouTube section. So you'll find that Mediator Experience is a section which will tell you who those people are. So Mediator Reflects. Also, this is one way of clicking. So that's one option that you have. Then of course, this is what happened last year. I just put down whatever, there's so much that happened. So that's the symposium, there were 97 speakers, then in conversation with a beautiful mind, 27 chats, evolution of Mediator, see these videos. So all these happened in the last year. So this, of course, you can click here and get the schedule also. Then there's Mediation Vision 2026 section where you will find there was, I mean, I'd put down these points for discussion in terms of Mediation Vision 2026, which we are, of course, working towards. So there we had these topics. Under those topics, of course, culture and traditions we already discussed in the symposium. So if you click here, you'll go to that playlist. Colonization, decolonization is coming up in September. Heart, soul, spirituality, and mediation has been something which I've been trying to discuss, and I'm saying that is one area is not discussed in relation to mediation. So if you click here, you can go to there's a playlist on heart, soul, spirituality. Then there's Mahatma Gandhi and mediation. You can go here. So this was that symposium that I did in April, Heart, Soul, Spirituality, and Mediation. So if you click here, you can go to the YouTube playlist for that. Then there's philosophy, Socrates and mediation. On the women and mediation, I celebrated International Women's Day. So we had about 25 women from 17 countries there. So you can click here, you can see that. So this is how this works. And then you have, of course, the forum. This is creativity and innovation. So there was one on the World Creativity and Innovation Day, had a discussion. So you'll find that. So of course, this is you'll find here. Then that symposium, the last year's symposium, you'll find the list of all the speakers.
Wow.
So you'll find so this Rafael, he's in Mexico. He called it the Woodstock of mediation. I love that name. So I called it that. So you'll find all the speakers, and you can click here, you can go to the YouTube link. So then of course you have the YouTube, you have the Mediation Academy, lectures about mediation, which you can click here and go there. Then you have, of course, the YouTube channel link. So, I mean, there is so much there, but I had to put some kind of an indexing thing for you to make it a little easier. So YouTube channel will give you that. Yeah, so it'll give you some details. So just to give you an idea that you look, watching all that is not happening, Dorina, for a long time, because there are more than 380 videos there, and each of them is minimum 1 hour. So we are talking about hundreds of hours of content available. So whatever you can watch, please watch them. They're all wonderful people who've come together and they've given their thoughts. So like you have, now you are part of that collection of content available for people around the world. So thank you very much, Dorina. Really nice of you. And please come and please attend other sessions. That schedule is there. Just drop in whenever you get time. Just come in, add to the discussion. You can ask your questions, whatever. So perfect. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Vikram. Thank you.